Welcome back. If you just joined us to watch the news at 10, coming to you live this Easter Sunday on Channels Television. A reminder of our top stories. Christians in Nigeria and all over the world celebrate Easter, commemorating the resurrection of Christ as clerics call for peace and good governance. President Buhari condoles with the government and people of Sri Lanka over the tragic Easter bomb attacks in the Asian country. Ogun State Police Command detains 2 officers over an incident of extrajudicial shooting in the Ifo area of the state. And bomb blasts in churches and hotels kill over 207 people in Sri Lanka's capital Colombo. 8 suspects arrested. ChannelsTV.com has more information for you, and on YouTube.com/channelsweb you can watch our videos. You can also watch us on a mobile device via your browser or download the Channels TV app for Android and iOS devices from their respective stores. Besides giving you access to news updates on the go, the Channels TV and Channels 24 app have an eyewitness feature that you can use to share pictures, videos, and news of happenings around you. Just install the app, then tap and swipe to reveal the menu and follow the instructions. Here are some of the stories that you sent into our portal. We begin with this one. It's about a bad road, a picture from Lagos State showing a muddy portion of Yanoba Road after light rainfall. The eyewitness is worried about not just the difficulty it poses to road users, but the risk of disease outbreak that the accumulation of dirt could cause. Eyewitness seeks urgent intervention in the area. We also have this video from Kogi State showing a young man painstakingly scooping sand from a riverbed in Lokoja in a bid to eke out a living. The eyewitness wants government to create more job opportunities for women to be economically empowered. Finally is this picture from Niger State showing students of a mass communication department of the Federal Polytechnic Bida mourning the death of a colleague. According to the eyewitness reporter, the sad incident occurred after a brief illness. The eyewitness reporter wants better healthcare facilities to be provided in the country to minimize cases of avoidable deaths. Thanks for sending in those reports, and we do look forward to getting more of them. Nigeria's petrol subsidy regime dates back to the 1980s, when government resorted to keeping the price of petrol low in order to achieve affordability. Decades after that decision was taken, petrol subsidy has become a controversial discourse as calls for the removal heightens from multilateral financial institutions and domestic analysis. In this report, Channel's business correspondent, Temple Ashaju, examines the implications of the calls for removal on the economy.
In 2015, the pressure on petrol price forced the federal government to give in and hike the price of premium motor spirit with a cap limit of 145 naira per litre. Subsequently, oil marketers raised the alarm over the sale of petrol at a price lower than the landing cost of PMS due to the rebound in global crude oil prices, a development that has become unsustainable and has forced governments to resume the payment of the differentials, which is now referred to as under-recoveries in the Federation account.
The last disclosure was about 189 naira per litre to be the effective market price of fuel, whilst it's being sold at 145 naira. So the differential is being borne by the government and is in effect actually a subsidy, despite the terminology being given to it to be an under-recovery.
At the spring meeting of the International Monetary Fund, the multilateral institution reiterated its age-long position on Nigeria's petrol subsidies.
We believe that removing fossil fuel subsidies is the right way to go. If you look at our numbers from 2015, it's no less than about $5.2 trillion that are spent on fuel subsidies and the consequences thereof.
In reaction, the federal government says it agrees with the IMF's recommendation, but notes that the removal of subsidies will require some buffers.
with the support of the legislature, we have to find a formula that works for Nigeria. And until we do that, we should not be contemplating removing the subsidy, because indeed when we do, there will be people that will suffer.
The best form of system to have is a free market system that's determined by the forces of demand and supply. So what I would think is that anything government can do to hasten up the cushion it has been talking about should be done as soon as possible.
Compilations of Nigeria's indirect expenditure on petrol subsidy shows a record 730 billion naira as of 2018, reducing government's revenues. With the dilemma of the removal, however, there is moderation in inflation and the economic welfare of the citizens. Temple Ashaju, Channels Television News.
I'm being joined now by Channels data consultant Babajide Gusowo. This is a topic you're really interested in, I'm sure. The IMF recently saying that we should remove a subsidy on petrol, and that money can be invested into sectors such as education and health. Is this good advice coming at this time? Do we have any data on those who are benefiting from this subsidy?
So perhaps we should ask how many cars are in Nigeria. And I'll share that information with you, and I think it will surprise you. But you know, it's Easter, and while Christians celebrate the rising of Christ, nobody really wants to celebrate the rise of petrol. Here's what I mean. The rising isn't the problem. It's what the rising means. And so the rising of Christ means good news. The rise of petrol signals bad news. And so there are three questions we should ask. The first is, who are those really consuming the fuel? The second question is, if it's fully deregulated, what will be the average price of fuel? And the third question, perhaps the most important, is what should government do? So let's start with the first. Who are those consuming the fuel? And the information we have from the Federal Road Safety Corps and the National Bureau of Statistics tells us that there are 11.8 million vehicles on Nigerian roads. But that's not what you should keep in mind. The evidence shows that more than half of the vehicles in Nigeria are commercially owned vehicles. In other words, you have more danfos and commercial vehicles on Nigerian roads than you have private vehicles. And we see that we only have 4.9 million privately owned vehicles out of 100 million adults.
And there will be more.
Oh, sure. Once there's prosperity, there will be more. But what it means is that we are subsidizing commercial transportation. That's one of three subsidies. Not really the privately owned vehicles, because less than 5% of families in Nigeria, less than 5% of individuals own vehicles. So the first out of three subsidies is we are subsidizing commercial transportation. The second subsidy is what people call generators. Like, a lot of families still buy generators. But listen carefully to this. A subsidy on generators isn't really a subsidy on generators. We buy generators because we don't have adequate electricity supply. So a subsidy on generators should actually be called a subsidy on failure. So the first is, the evidence shows we're subsidizing commercial transportation. The second is, we have a subsidy on failure. The third is, we say there's a subsidy because of smuggling. But listen carefully to this. What is the cause of smuggling? Corruption. So smuggling, really, when we subsidize subsidy, when there's smuggling and fuel goes through the borders, what we're doing is we're subsidizing corruption. So that brings us to the summary of three types of subsidies. Subsidy on commercial transportation, subsidy on failure because we're buying generators, and the third is subsidy on corruption. We're subsidizing corruption because a lot of petrol still goes through our borders.
So are we being helped by the IMF advice, or is this something we should ignore?
You know, with the IMF advice, there's two schools of thought. Some say the IMF has a hidden agenda. Some say no, it is purely altruistic. So let's look at the two schools of thought. Is there a hidden agenda? And one of the ways to find out if there's a hidden agenda is to look at, you know, what they say about he who pays the piper. And so in 2015, how much external debt did the federal government owe foreign borrowers? The evidence shows us that 2015, federal government debt, external debt, was $7.3 billion, Amachi. In 3 years, as at the end of 2018, external debt owed by the federal government had moved from $7.3 billion to $21 billion. In other words, in 3 years, external debt owed by the federal government had tripled. And so clearly, they have a stake in the economy. Why do they have a stake? When fuel prices go up, let's connect the dots. Inflation happens. When there's inflation, there's a weakening of the currency. And once the currency weakens, it simply means those that hold dollars, those foreign investors that have lots of dollars in their possession can now buy more naira-denominated assets at a cheaper price. So you have more dollars, and once the naira is weakened, then your dollars can allow you to buy more naira. In other words, the first school of thought are concerned because they point to neo-colonialism. But however, that is just one perspective. The second perspective is to look at how much money goes into this subsidy. Over 100 billion naira every year. 100 billion naira is more money, is much more money than what we invest in the National Judicial Council. It is more money than even the National Assembly collects per annum. In other words, fuel subsidy is the fourth arm of government. So if you now have the judiciary, you have the executive, you have the legislative, now we have the subsidy.
Bottom line, Babajide, what exactly are you saying? Heed IMF advice or not, continue with the subsidy or remove the subsidy?
There is no right answer. And so while the IMF thinks that there's a right answer, we have multiple answers. What the government needs to do is three things. First is we need to be very transparent about the subsidy. How much is being paid, and let's thoroughly examine the value chain. The second is if we choose to fully deregulate, the government now needs to be able to tell Nigerians what will all that money be used for. And third and perhaps final is maybe we should put it to vote. Perhaps we should have a vote of some sort, a referendum, and let's really let Nigerians tell us what they would prefer. Will it be subsidy exit, or will the subsidy stay?
that would be a first, a referendum. Thanks again, Babajide.
But let's not be led by our fears. We need to be hopeful, and we need to make decisions in the interest of the common man. That is the lesson.
And that's the bottom line of the Easter message today. Thanks again for joining us on the program. A happy Easter to you.
Happy Easter. Let's look at if the prices will rise or the prices will stay.
Of course. Babajide Ogusowa, our data consultant. Now, when the News at 10 returns, our community report tonight takes a look at the emergent popularity of the traditional thatch roofs in Enugu State. Please join us again.